Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. I'm glad through the miracles of technology that we can do this. I'm going to talk to you about child safety, what you can do to help keep your children safe from abuse and from other things in terms of maintaining relationships with them, how to communicate. But primarily, I'm going to be talking to you as parents about how child safety education works, why it's effective, and I'm going to really give you the tools to be able to have these informed conversations with your children. Then I'm going to be speaking for a few moments about community members, what you can do as a cohesive community. I absolutely believe that communities don't all have the same abuse rates, and a lot of it depends on decisions that you make as a community. I'm going to be talking about that. And then we're going to open up to questions. My understanding is that there's a roving microphone. So after my presentation, I'll be delighted to take any questions that you have. So to begin with, I know it's difficult to get your hands around this, that people that you know, people that you may respect, that you're friendly with, could possibly do terrible things to children. But it happens. I don't know your community at all. I never had the pleasure of of visiting it, maybe one day. But I can guarantee you that South Africa, Johannesburg, just like Muncie and Williamsburg and Yerushalayim and London are not immune from the world's problems. Your community is not immune from that either. And it really is difficult. One of the barriers to understanding why we need this education, one of the barriers is that it's just so hard to comprehend that this really happens. It does happen. Please, like the rabbi said, I'm not here to frighten you. The research shows that when you speak to your children, if you speak to them in a way that frightens them, the research shows that they're not going to remember much about what you said because the fear crowds out thinking. I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later. So you're supposed to have these conversations in a relaxed way. Which is why we made our child safety book that I understand, will be distributed or for sale there. We made it in a very friendly way, without anything frightening, without any images that could make anybody nervous. Quite to the contrary, we made it in a friendly way so that you can speak to your children in a relaxed way. I'm going to do the same and speak to you in a relaxed way. I'm not going to tell you any horror stories. I'm not going to frighten you. But I'm just going to start out by saying, trust me, it happens everywhere. So I'm going to talk to you again about how it works. Why does child safety education work? How can you train a small child to defend themselves against a much larger adult who wants to take advantage of them, God forbid? So to understand that, it's important to walk you through this. And the reason that child safety education is so helpful is because the chas v'shalom, the abusers, the people who want to hurt children or abuse them, they're frightened of children who are spoken to. In other words, the vast, overwhelming majority of abusers or people who abuse children are people that the children know. It does happen that strangers start up with them, and you're supposed to talk about stranger danger. Be careful from strangers. That's certainly part of it. And child safety education is comprehensive. There is everything I'm going to tell you tonight is not going to completely keep your children safe. There's a supervision component. There's an education, you educating them. It's about, there are so many different pieces of it. But this piece works because most of the abusers are people that the children know. They're usually people on the inner circle. That's why it's so hard to imagine that this could happen. So what the abusers do, they go through a process called grooming. It's very rare that they start and abuse a child the first time they meet them. Why? Because they're afraid that that child might have a close family connection, and that child might have been spoken to by you as their parents. And if you're effectively doing this to your children, you told your kids that no one, which I'm going to go through later, no one's allowed to keep secrets. No one's allowed to tell them to keep a secret from you. So if they say, don't tell your parents about it, if your children were spoken to and know this, they're going to run right to you and say, so-and-so told me not to tell you something. If they feel uncomfortable and they're trained that they're allowed to go away from a situation where they feel uncomfortable. So the two things that abusers are afraid of most are close family connections and education. They are terrified of kids who were spoken to and children who have close families. That's what this is all about. So since they check to see if children were educated, I'm going to talk about it a little more later, that's why it's so effective, because they're afraid to start up with children who are educated. And I'm going to speak about later, I believe that abusers are much less likely to abuse children in communities that are educated and communities that take child safety seriously. So again, it's part of a comprehensive piece: supervision, discussion, relationships. Get your children into the habit of sharing their day with you. During question and answer, feel free to ask. My kid is very shy. I say, how was your day? And he or she says, whatever. I don't know what you guys there say instead of whatever. But feel free to go. That's why we're having Q&A, so you can really ask questions and follow up on it. But this is how it works. It works because this comprehensive piece: supervision, education, parenting, getting the children comfortable speaking to you about uncomfortable things. Again, if any of you want to discuss this is not going to be part of my presentation, but if any of you want to discuss this, I'll be glad to. How can you get your children to be comfortable to speak to you about things that are uncomfortable? So let's get started on the four basic child safety messages. They are no secrets from parents. That means no one is ever allowed to tell your child, keep this between us. Okay, that's message number one. Message number two is your body belongs to you. The notion of personal space and the ownership that kids have a right to maintain their own space. Good touching, bad touching. Some touching is okay, some touching is not okay. We'll give you some examples of how to explain this to your children. And finally, no one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. That's the fourth message. No one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. That is, of the four messages, that's sort of the most challenging to explain because it's not that clear, and we'll go through them. Okay? So number one, again, is no secrets from parents. Real simple. Nobody, look, I was a school principal for many years. I was a Rebbe for many years. There is no reason in this world why I should ever tell a student of mine, let's keep this a secret between us. It's absolutely inappropriate, and it's a huge red flag because it may be that people innocently say this, but the abusers almost always say things like this. So training your children to come to you when someone tells them to keep a secret from you is the first step in being able to keep your kids safe. Just so you know, you wonder to yourself, are they really going to remember this, months later? And a lot of parents, the reason why child safety education, some parents they feel that it's not going to work is you make what we call in Gemara, kal v'chomer. You say, well, they don't listen when I talk to them. I say, don't fight with your sister. And 2 minutes later, they're fighting. So they don't listen when they're right there in front of me. How are they going to listen, months or years later? And the answer is that it does work. And the research shows that, and I can tell you from personal experience, it's so helpful. It really does work. I'll tell you an adorable story. About 20 years ago, I I wanted my parents in my yeshiva. I was a Menalav yeshiva for many years, and I wanted the parents to speak to their children about this subject before they went off to camp. I didn't feel qualified to give the talk at the time because I really didn't know that much about it. So I brought in a wonderful therapist to speak to the children about child safety. And he gave them these messages, one of them which is no secrets from parents. This was in June. The next year, Shavuos, 11 months later, is a true story. The second grade general studies teacher, the English teacher in our school, just a wonderful teacher, she made a Shavuos project where the kids made flowers for their mother. So they spent one day cutting the flowers and gluing it together, and then they let it dry. They lined them up to dry, the kids' names on the back, and the next day they were going to paint it and then bring it home. So the Mora tells the kids on the way out, go ahead, what did she say? Don't tell mommy, it's a surprise. So she told the kids on the way out, please just keep this a secret, don't tell mommy till you bring it home tomorrow. We dismissed the school buses at 4:15 in the afternoon. I kid you not, 2-3 minutes later, as the kids got to the first stop, my phone started ringing. And the parents were calling that the kids ran off the bus, saying, Mommy, Mora told us not to tell you something, to keep a secret from you. None of the parents thought that anything was wrong. They understood right away. What was it about? A Shavuos project. They were fascinated that the kids remembered. They couldn't believe it, that the children actually remembered what we had told them. So, so this stuff really works. So that's the first message, no secrets from parents. The second one is your body belongs to you. It's the notion of personal space. Children, at a very young age, are aware of that things belong to them. If you want to test it out, go to a young child that's 2 or 3 years old and try taking away their favorite blanket or a pacifier, whatever you call it, or any items of theirs. They understand this at a very young age. So what we want to teach them is that they belong to them, that they have a right to their own space. And you can reinforce this in so many ways. If your children, let's say, are mixing it up or getting in each other's, start fighting with each other or not respecting each other's space, speak to them not only about that you're arguing with your brother or sister, you're in their space. That reinforces the notion. The research shows that if you have 2 children born in the same home, everything is exactly the same. One of them has a private drawer at home that belongs to them, and the other one does not. I don't know if you guys use the word drawer. Somebody translate. If I'm saying words that are Americanized, feel free to just yell out and explain what I mean. So if a child has a clothing drawer at home where they keep their stuff and the other children know not to go to that space, the research shows that the child who has the drawer will be more likely to defend him or herself. It means even a small little thing like that, where children have a notion of this personal space, makes them more likely to defend themselves. So that's another very important message. Good touching, bad touching, really simple. Explain to your children that some touching is okay, some touching is not okay. A very tsanua, a modest and appropriate way to say would be something along the lines of, if anyone touches you in a spot covered by a bathing suit, that would be a perfectly appropriate way to explain that to them. And the experts say that it's important to list the exceptions very carefully. That means there are people, let's say and it depends on the age, but let's say you have a 3-year-old. There are people who are going to touch them in their private spaces. Parents, if you're away, you have grandparents, they have a teacher in school, you have an ozeret, a help at home, or a babysitter. So you can't say nobody's allowed to touch you in a private space, because some people do. But the experts say that it's very important to list these exceptions very carefully and very succinctly. In other words, not to say no one's allowed to touch you in a private space except for people in our family. Because unfortunately, sometimes people in families abuse kids. So keep it as narrow as possible. The only ones who are allowed to touch you in a private space are, mommy and daddy, abba and ima, whatever, tati, mami, when we're bathing you or when you dirty yourself and we clean you up when you go to the bathroom. And, Bobby, Sapta, whatever, grandma, when we're not around, or a babysitter when we're around, the doctor when we take you in for a visit and we're in the room. So keep them very, very narrow so that the children can understand that only in those situations is it okay. So speak about the exceptions and make it very clear as to what you're talking about. Now, with all of these things, it's very possible that you'll get a false positive, which means that the children, let's say, are waiting online to go out for a recess break, or they're waiting in school or in shul, they're waiting online to get a treat, or they're just, and a kid bumps into another boy and touches him in his backside, or touches him in a private space. So they'll come home and tell you. So again, the experts say not to say something like, well, I didn't mean that, because they don't know what you meant and what you didn't mean. But rather say, thank you for telling me, listen, and then you'll say, it sounds like this was okay, but I do very much want you to tell me when anything like this ever happens. Okay? The last one is, and like I said, this is the tough one. It's harder because it's not as clear. No one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. That basically means that if children feel uncomfortable, even if they can't describe why, they have a right to leave, and that you will support their right to leave. And the reason this is so important, because I explained earlier about the grooming process, where abusers very, very rarely will go over and abuse a child right away. They're more likely to put a hand on their shoulder, or rub their arm, or have the hand slide down their back a little bit, and they're looking at how the child will react. If the child gives them a look, like you shouldn't be doing that, you can be almost sure, and there's no guarantees in life, but in all likelihood, that abuser is going to go away and never speak to your child again, because that he knows that he or she knows that the child was spoken to. But what happens is, along this grooming process, if you think of it like a continuum, like a process that happens over a period of weeks or months, usually research shows, and I haven't spoken to many hundreds or thousands of abuse victims, it's clear that anecdotally this happens. They feel uncomfortable and a little weird long before chas v'shalom the abuse took place. And they might not have the language to be able to explain it to you. But they just feel weird. And we all have this as adults. We feel sometimes uncomfortable around someone. You can't even put your finger on it. The message to your children, and my message to you as parents, trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. Trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, if you don't like the way someone's speaking to your child, follow your instincts and step in. And teach your children to do the same. I'll give you a simple example that might illustrate this a little bit better about why it's important to have this message. Think about spacing. Okay, I can't see it. That you're. I guess you dimmed the lights to see me, but I don't know how. I can't see exactly how close you're sitting to each other. But if not being able to see you, if I asked you a general question, how close should you sit next to someone at a parenting class on abuse? But at a parenting class, how close should you be sitting to someone? The answer is, it depends. If the shul, or wherever you're congregating, I believe it's in shul, if the shul is jam-packed, it's perfectly normal to sit right next to someone, right? So you wouldn't feel bugged out if someone sat literally right next to you, maybe even touching you. If you're sitting on benches and it's packed, that's normal. I can guarantee you, if there's 4 people in the room and everybody takes a space and the 4th person walks in and sits down right next to you, you're going to go crazy. You're going to get bugged out right away. Nothing changed. The context changed. The person is sitting as close to you as in the other situation. The context changed. Children don't always have the language to be able to express this. Mommy, this is what it sounds like. mommy, you know, an older boy or a cousin or somebody, whatever, came and put their hand on my back. Did he touch you in a private space? No. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Now, the kid might not have been able to express to you that that hand lingered too long, or the guy was looking at him in a, I keep saying guy, it's, you know, women abuse also, just so you know, I mean, but I'm, you know, most of my experience is with guys, but, but again, it's important to understand that they might not be able to have that context to be able to say that he was giving me this weird look. Or it's the 5th time that it happened in a day and I asked him to stop and he didn't. They might not be that articulate. They might be embarrassed. Very often when children talk about things that are uncomfortable, they throw out little pieces at you. They'll tell you a little bit and you'll find out more later. So they might not have the language to be able to express this. They might want to say more than this, and they didn't for some reason at the time. So if you just say, oh, I'm glad he didn't touch you, they might not get that message that it's okay to run away, to get out of the situation. So a healthy message is, if you feel uncomfortable, no matter what, no matter who, no matter how, we will support your right to get out of a situation where you're uncomfortable. And you know, one more thing that I encourage you to think about, and then I'm going to go on and talk to you as community members, is this whole idea that you can't make assumptions. I know this flies against everything that we were taught about being dan l'kavschos, about judging people favorably, and not saying l'shon hara, not saying gossip, not believing gossip, and that we're an Am Kadosh, you know, a holy nation. All of this stuff goes against it. But the fact of the matter is that you never know what's going on with somebody else. You don't know who was abused as children. They may have been abused, if they didn't go for proper help and training, they're more likely to abuse others. You don't know, you never know, you never know. Chazal told us that you know, the rules of Yichud and all those other things were across the board. It doesn't mean rabbis don't get exceptions, relatives don't get exceptions. Well, for Yichud, some of them do, in some circumstances. But it could be anybody. I'll tell you another thing. There's a thing called the halo effect. The halo effect basically says that when we make decisions about people, very often we prejudge them before we even make that decision. The original research was done in the army, where they noticed that soldiers who were attractive, well-dressed, like had it together, so to speak. They just seemed like they were, put together, were much more likely to get favorable ratings from sergeants, from people that they're superiors, than people who weren't, didn't give off that image. We make judgments. What we do is we mix two things together: who did it and what they did. Think about it. Who did it and what they did. And then those two factors together govern how you're going to respond to a situation. So if you were the second person walking into your shul tonight and you saw somebody with their hand in the pushka box, in the charity box, taking out some bills, would you call the police? Would you be frightened? Well, it depends who it was. If it's somebody you know and you trust, you say, they probably put a larger denomination bill and they're taking change. Or this person is in charge of the charity box and they're just emptying it out. So you saw something that was frightening, somebody stealing or taking money that's not theirs, but you put that together with the person and you say, I get it, it's okay. If it's somebody suspicious looking, somebody that looks creepy or frightening or dangerous or whatever, you'll phone the police because you put those two together and it gets scared. With this issue of child abuse, you cannot factor in who did it. If it's weird, if people shouldn't be doing this, then I shouldn't be doing it either. Really, this is such an important message. I did a talk with a police chief in New Jersey in America many years ago, and he said it's the it, not the whom. Judge the action by itself. If you would be frightened or intimidated by having someone spend time alone with your child, taking them home, showing an undue interest, whatever it is, then if it's not okay for someone else, it's not okay for me, and it's not okay for anyone. Now, that doesn't mean, chas v'shalom, I'm not suggesting that you should walk around all day long being suspicious of everyone that they're abusers. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish, and it's not healthy. Like the rabbi said, your children need to live their lives. They need to go to other people's homes. They go away to summer camp. They need to live. You can't have them be frightened of everyone. They're going to be totally neurotic. There's a balance to find. Our Chazal, in their great wisdom, had an expression, kabdeyu v'chashteyu. Kabdeyu, give kavod, give respect. V'chashteyu, but be suspicious. So it's really both of those together is a healthy mix. I'm just going to go to the community part, and then I'm going to open up and take some questions. Communities, I said at the beginning, I don't have research to support this, but I've been around the block a lot. All communities do not have the same abuse rates. Just like abusers try to select families or children that they can abuse, chas v'shalom, and get away with it, they groom communities also. And there are things that communities can and must do to make it unattractive for an abuser to set up shop. And that's what you're doing tonight, having child safety education, talking about it, seeing that chas v'shalom, if people are abused, they should be able to come to a bika chalim, to a rav, to a rebbetzin, to friends, and seek help. If you know someone was traumatized, and you in the audience, look, I'm speaking to a group of people, I don't know any of you. Just running the numbers, it's very possible that some of you had been traumatized as children, and it's very hard to sort this out yourself. So seeing that mental health services are available to victims makes all the difference in the world. It helps the kids, it helps the community as a whole send a message that we support safety here. Reporting abusers to the authorities sends a message to the abusers. And when you say, well, we're going to keep an eye on him, folks, that doesn't work. It never worked. It never will work. So communities that do these things, I believe, have much lower abuse rates. And communities that don't do these things, that don't have education, that don't have protocols in shul. I know you're not here to talk about this now or in schools, but I'll be glad to follow with any of community leaders who are interested. There's a lot of great work being done in the area of having protocols for institutions. There's a Dr. Shaarei Berkovitz who's done fantastic work in this. You can look her up online. But it's about having rules in shuls, in schools. Should I, as a Rebbe, take children home alone in my car? What's the rule about hugging children? I'm not telling you what rules you should make in your. Certainly, nobody should ever give you guidance on this from whatever 11,000 miles away, not knowing your community. But having rules about these things helps keep children safe. It also helps keep adults safe from suspicion. I always advise adults to be really careful about their boundaries, especially if you're working with children, especially if you're in communal life, to make sure that you have real boundaries in your personal life, because if someone can make an accusation against an adult, if the adult has proper procedures in his or her life, it's very, very unlikely that the accusations will stick. I was very involved in a high-profile abuse case in Brooklyn, in New York, 7 years ago, and the abuser was convicted and sent away for a very long time. And I was doing a radio show in a firm radio program, and someone called up and someone said, Rabbi Horowitz, you're taking the word of this victim against this man. What happens if someone says something about you? And he asked very respectfully. I thought it was a very fair question. I wasn't offended at all. So I told him that, in my opinion, an accusation, is like a piece of Velcro. You guys call Velcro down there? You know what Velcro is? Yeah. Sticky stuff. Okay, so abuse is one piece of Velcro. An accusation is one piece of Velcro. Velcro doesn't stick to glass. The second piece of Velcro is poor practice. So if someone is poor practice, meaning not having boundaries in your own lives. So I said, if someone's going to come and say that, make an accusation against me, they have to say where it happened. I'm never alone with children. I don't do any meetings ever with women alone. So besides for the fact of yichud, I'm extraordinarily careful about the boundaries that I have in my life. So it's true, somebody could really mess up someone's life by making an accusation, but if the people keep proper protocols and have boundaries, it's far less likely that the accusation will stick. And I think that's another piece that communities can do, is by setting norms and appropriate boundaries for the adults as it relates to children, or as it relates to people of the opposite gender, makes it less likely that there will be problems for children, and it also makes it less likely to have problems for adults. Okay? So I'm done. I have some other things to speak about, but I'm done for now. And if it comes up during Q&A, I really would like to hear your questions. So again, let me just, before that, quickly review. As parents, become educated yourself. This is just the beginning. Learn about child safety education. Read about it. Bring people in to talk about it. Speak to your children. And have a general culture of support in your homes. That's as parents. And see to it, again, I'll take it during Q&A if you want more details about this, but see to it that your children are comfortable talking to you about anything. It's not an easy thing to do. Again, I'll take it during question and answer if you haven't. But that's what you can do as parents and as community members, to take this subject seriously, to see to it that children are protected, that children are educated, that the adults are educated, that there are norms in the community, and that you send a message that it's not okay to harm kids here. And people who are abusers aren't welcome, and that we're going to see to it that our children are protected. Believe me, people know, abusers know, you could know which communities take this stuff seriously and which ones don't. And it's not a coincidence that those types of communities I believe, have much lower abuse rates. So, kol hakavod to you. I want to thank the Lifshitzes. It's been a pleasure interacting with you both over the last few weeks or months since we started talking about this. I commend you folks, parents, for coming out to the Rav Shlita. Thank you for the introduction. And Hashem should give you wisdom and kayach to lead your community well for many, many, many years to come. And I thank you for taking the initiative to make this a priority. That's what helps keep kids safe. Pass around the mic. Take it away. If anybody needs to leave or has to go, please. I always say I was an 8th grade Rebbe for 15 years. I'm used to having people walk in and out. So it doesn't bother me at all. Just go right ahead. Take some refreshments if you want. Just grab a mic and go.
Rabbi Horowitz, my name is Valdi Barkov. I've got 2 questions for you.
Please.
First of all, reporting to legal statutory authorities in light of the subject of Masira.
Okay, that's one.
Okay, that's the first question. Second question is, let's assume, theoretically speaking, I'm aware of a victim of abuse, or possibly more than one victim. And again, theoretically speaking, we're dealing with a potential theoretical perpetrator. The victim, however, does not want me to report because it would mean exposing the victim. On the other hand, keeping quiet enables the perpetrator to do it again,
right,
and again,
yep,
and again.
So those are really excellent questions. I'm glad you started. I'm glad you started right away with the tough stuff. No, look, anything you ask is fair, and everything you ask is reasonable. I will not hide from any questions. The issue of Masira. Masira, Moser means to hand over. And throughout rabbinic literature, throughout the Shilas Hatshuvas over hundreds, thousands of years, certainly over hundreds of years, especially when we lived in communities that were not friendly, going to the authorities and whispering in their ear that so-and-so was smuggling in cotton or liquor or whatever, or tobacco, very often was a death sentence. There wasn't due process. They didn't have opportunity to defend themselves like we do today. And the prisons were places where people were just killed. So, therefore, you will find throughout the Tshuvas things saying that Masira is a terrible thing, and you're a reidif if you're it's like you're trying to kill someone if you're committing Masira. The very, very clear psak, halachic ruling that I got from Rab David Cohen Shlita, who's in America probably the preeminent posek, probably in the world on these issues, is that there's absolutely no issue of Masira as it relates to a child abuser. Quite to the contrary, the child abuser is the reidif. Rab David Cohen, I was at a workshop. I did a presentation like this. Rab David Cohen Shlita took questions from Rabbanim about this about 5-8 years ago, and someone asked this question: how come we don't see anything in the Tshuvas saying that it's okay to go to the authorities? So he said something that was very profound. He said that until, pick a number, 20, 40, 50 years ago, no one really understood this whole space, this whole thing. People didn't understand the danger. They didn't understand how it works. People were unaware of it, and people weren't aware of the life or death consequences. How many abuse victims, Rahman al-Islam, take their own lives, kill themselves after living through a life of Gehenna, of pain. So he says, people thought until then, when the Shilas and Tshuvas were written, people thought that Masira, that this whole space of abuse was an Ebenezer Shaila. It was the equivalent of, let's say, having an affair or marrying someone that you're not allowed to marry. It was a sin between you and God. He says, now we know that the person is a murderer. He said it's not an Ebenezer Shaila. He says, it's a Choshen Mishpat Shaila. The abuser is a murderer. And they pose a clear and present danger to children. I do not know of any posek who will say that if there's an absolute if someone knows their child was abused, I don't know of a single responsible paisik who would say that they shouldn't go to the police. Where it does get a little tricky is what happens if there's an accusation. What happens if it's not so clear? Let's say the child didn't say chas v'shalom that somebody abused them, but that someone's driving them a lot and that touched them in an inappropriate space, and you don't know, let's say, if it went further than that. They see grooming activities. So that's where it gets a little tricky. I have always said that when people call me and say, I have an accusation or whatever, my first response always is that I'm not a detective. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable about this whole inyan, but I'm not a detective. How can I find out? I don't have staff. I don't have time. I don't have resources. I can't make a person come to me. Let's say I go over to a guy and say, come over to my house. I want to talk to you. He says, Horowitz, get out of here. Like, what am I supposed to do? The only ones who can really sort it out are the police. Now, one advice that I give to parents, now, obviously, going to the police, again, I do not know how it works in South Africa, so please forgive me if what I'm saying is not how it works in your community, then take it accordingly. But in New York, in America, in most communities in America, they don't arrest the person right away if there's an accusation. They'll come down and typically, I know in New York or many municipalities, they have 2, 3, or 4 detectives that meet separately with the victim and ask them questions. And if the story is not true, it usually falls apart during that process. It's very hard to say, come up with a lie when you don't know if they're going to ask you what the weather was like or how many other people were in the room or what was the guy wearing, and that's just the way it works. The research shows that besides the cases of divorce, where there's a custody battle, where one side, I hope nobody ever does this, but, where one side would have what to gain if they don't want the other parent to have the children. Besides for those situations, it's very rare that people make an accusation that's not real. I'm sure it's certainly so that the research shows that it's less than 5%. But again, it certainly is a big step. I'll tell you the advice that I give people that call with a question. My advice to them is go to a licensed therapist, tell them what happened, bring your child along. That therapist is a mandated reporter in America. That means they must report to the police. So therefore, you fulfilled your obligation, certainly. You take it to a therapist. If the therapist says, look, this isn't really something to worry about, fine, then you did the right thing to keep your child safe and other people safe. And if the therapist is terrified that something went on, then they can hand it over to the police. So I hope I answered you, Ms. your question, and the second part also. I think that this notion of we're going to take care of this has been an absolute disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And sending people from one community to another doesn't help either. Now, what you're mentioning about a victim not wanting to come forward, that's a problem. I mean, it does come to my attention many times. I ask people to go to the authorities. Some of them say, I'm not strong enough, I'm afraid. I don't think you can override a victim's wishes and go to the authorities and say, this person abused that person. You might, if you know for sure that the person was abused, you might go and talk to a therapist about, should you go and tell the authorities that this person has been seen, involved with children in ways that they shouldn't be. But it's complicated. If a victim is not strong enough to come forward, I don't think you should out them. I don't think so. Okay? Anybody else, please?
Just going to pass the mic.
Are we done?
No, there is some
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to ask, what is the what situation is the best way to talk to kids? In what setting? In which is
Great,
it
excellent question. Right, in what
Lots-
setting?
lots of kids-
How to have this
together.
conversation. So the best thing is not to make a whole production out of it. Like, don't come. All my adult life, I've been working with teens at risk. So I'll never forget one of the kids. In America, there's a thing called an Aguda convention, where the people go to Agudas Yisrael makes a convention, and hundreds and thousands of people come and hear the Rosh Yeshiva speak. So one of the teens that I was working with, he was constantly fighting with his parents about media consumption. This was before smartphones, and then it was the internet. So he was constantly quarreling with his parents about it. So he tells me, he says, Rebbe, my parents go to the Aguda convention and they come home, we're throwing out the TVs. He said, like, when they come home crazy, I'm not letting them go next year. So I don't want you running home and sit down, there's something terrible going on and I need to talk to you. Have it in a very relaxed way, the way you would talk about fire safety or other safety. Dr. David Pelkowitz, who's one of the top therapists in the Jewish world on this whole space, and he was gracious to give us so much time. He mentored me when I started dealing with, I'm a yeshiva guy, I didn't know anything about these things. He mentored me, and Dr. Benzine Tversky, those two, by the way, the book, that Let's Stay Safe book, they went through every single page, every single picture. They spent dozens, maybe hundreds of hours helping us make the book. But Dr. Pelkowitz says that like in a stress level from 1 to 10, 10 is like you really scare the kids, and 1 is you say, oh, by the way, don't eat with your hands. It should be like a 2 or 3. So try to make it as a regular conversation. If you notice the book, we started with regular safety stuff, crossing the street, putting on a helmet, then we went to stranger danger, and only in the middle do we have the abuse pages to enable you to have this conversation in a relaxed way. The children don't know to be nervous because they don't know what you're talking about, but they sense the apprehension in you, and like I said earlier, the research would say that shows that that they're not going to remember what you said. So have it in a relaxed way. You need to convey to them that this is something important, not different than, don't talk with your mouth full at the table or use your napkin. It's more serious than that. Not that using a napkin isn't serious. But, but to get this message without terrifying them. I hope I answered your question. If I didn't...
Is it better to do it one-on-one or a few kids together, or, whole kids? Like
possibly.
together?
Either way, I think either way is fine. The real action happens later. The real conversations and what you're trying to accomplish happens later when they come back and talk to you about things. So think of what the conversation that I'm encouraging you to have with your children as step 1 of a very long process where you have honest conversations with children about things. Purim's coming up. I don't know if you guys have a drinking problem, but that's a conversation you should have with your kids. It's a gateway drug. I'm very, 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 very opposed to having parents, community members apply alcohol on kids. But so this is just a lifelong process. But it starts with being comfortable talking to them about anything. Okay?
At what age, more or less, should the first conversation be?
We found that the book and this type of, as young as 3, 2.5, they understand a lot at that time, at that age. Our 3-year-old grandson, we were babysitting a few months ago, and he told me that we were playing some game of some sort. He says, I'm going into Zaidi. I'm going into the bathroom for private space, and he was basically telling me, "Don't come in," which is remarkable. Our daughter did a good job, son-in-law, whatever. But that's what it looks like, to train your children to. And this grandson, I give the kids baths when guys, I don't want to get you into trouble. I bathed all our kids and grandkids, but what I as the kids get older, I say some things like, "You're old enough to do this on your own now." So weaning them off your involvement there, it's a process. It's a process, but I think 2.5, 3 is certainly appropriate to have an age-appropriate discussion. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, there's been a trend towards a lot of cameras and videos in classrooms and around communal settings, which is as much for the safety as of the teachers.
Absolutely, that's what I was going to say, right? Absolutely.
So, at what point does it become inappropriate, crossing a red line, where shuls and schools are thinking about having such cameras in the bathrooms?
So that's a tough question. So generally speaking, cameras, just like you said, protect the adults as much as the children. I can tell you that Torah Masora, which is in America, we have an organization called Torah Masora. That's a network of all the yeshivas. Made a contract addendum that they encourage yeshivas to use. It was reviewed by the Miatzis Gedalia Torah and said things like, you shouldn't be making inappropriate jokes to children. You shouldn't be alone with your students. Basically, guidelines for the Rabbeim, and they encouraged us to put it in the contract. And most yeshivas did not do it right away. I did it the first year it came out, and honestly, my Rabbeim were offended. Some of the Rabbeim, they said, "Rabbi Horowitz, I checked with all my other friends. Nobody else is doing this. What do you think?" I said, "It's for your protection. If you do this, you don't have to worry." But I don't know about the bathrooms. I haven't heard of anybody who did that. Certainly an outer room, a washroom, or in a place where you can't see into stalls. I could see it happening. I'm not sure. I'm really not. I mentioned that Dr. Shira Berkovitz. You should look her up. She does fantastic work on organizations. If any of you want to look at a shul, you can have a look. There's a Young Israel of Woodmere, Woodmere, I believe. Young Israel of Woodmere. They have a website, and on the homepage of the website, on the right side, there's an icon there that has, excuse me, protocols for the shul, how we operate here, how the youth groups work, how who people can go to if they're made to feel uncomfortable. So I would absolutely defer to what Dr. Shira said over anything I would say about this notion, about this idea. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. I just want to mention. I mentioned about the Young Israel of Woodmere. My dear friend Andrew Lauer, Avi Lauer, and Dr. Michael Salomon, who are both mispalalim of the shul, drafted and created these protocols well over a year, and it was a collaborative process, which is how research shows that it works. They're available to help anyone who wants to find out more about it. You can just download the entire thing, and at least it could be a start for your community to get some protocols in. Anybody else?
Do you think that abuse is happening more in the last 20 or 30 years, or it's simply reported more in the open?
I think it's much less now. I think it's much less. It's happening much less. I believe that it's happening less than it did before, because there's much more awareness. If you look, a lot of these stories that are coming, the big headline stories, are mostly 10, 20 years ago, not stuff that happened now. So this is the messy part, because we're cleaning up decades of abuse. So I do believe that child safety education works. I do believe that communities that take this seriously, it lowers the abuse rate. I'm sad to say that not all Jewish communities are taking it as seriously as others, And I think it makes a big difference. Like I said, it really makes a difference. Here's one way of thinking about it. I don't spend too much time on this, but here's a creative way. I found this helpful to think about it this way. Again, if I'm not using South African words, my brother grew up in South Africa. He actually taught me how to eat with a fork and knife, and is very polite. So I really don't know the culture and how it works there. But think about it this way. An insurance company, who does your health insurance? Is it everybody has it, or is it run by the government? I'm sorry? Private. Okay, so good. So if you're paying insurance, health insurance, or you're paying insurance on an automobile, so an actuary determines how much you should be paying, right? Let's take a car, for example. I can't see whoever asked the question. If I'm an insurance agent and you're want to register an automobile, what questions would I ask you to find out how much you should pay?
The value of the vehicle.
Value of the vehicle.
Age.
Your age, right? Why? Because a young person is a higher risk, right? Go ahead. How many accidents do you have? Do you live in a safe neighborhood, right? So they ask all of these questions to determine how likely it is that they're going to have a claim that you generate. So here's my idea, and I thought of it because I was trying to figure out a way to explain this in a non-threatening way. Here's the idea. Imagine that health insurance companies offered a rider an additional policy for child abuse. Okay? Let's say you as a parent could go to the insurance company and say, I'd like to pay an extra whatever it is per month, and chas v'shalom, if their children get abused, they get free treatment and drug rehab, whatever they need to get the kid whole. Okay? Now, what's that adjuster going to ask you? He doesn't know anything about your community. He doesn't know Johannesburg. He doesn't know your shul. He doesn't know the Jewish community. This is some guy who never met a Jewish person in his life. He knows nothing about your community. How is he going to, or she, going to assess your community's risk level? What are they going to ask you? If your shul or your school wants to go for a policy and they want a rider there that they should be protected in the case of abuse, what would an adjuster ask? Do you do training? Do abuse victims get help? Are abuse victims supported, or are they afraid to go to the police? Do they make Pidyon Shvuyim campaigns like the one in Eretz Yisrael now for someone who has incredibly credible abuse allegations against them? Or do they raise money for the therapy of the victim? So there's 5, 6, 7 questions that I would ask coming in. If I wanted to know what's the risk rate of your community, that's what I would want to find out. So this is what it looks like. That's why I say that. So it's definitely getting better. More people are doing what your shul is doing now and what your community is doing now. And because of that, that's why I believe that we're safer, because if you go, more victims are going for help, and more people are much more likely to support a victim. So all of these things if you ask me, it's in Yiddish we call it a bachsvara, an idea that just generated out of the air. If you're asking me how I could make such a statement, I would answer that it's based on doing an assessment of how communities are reacting about this entire thing. This class tonight would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, right? So that's a great step forward. Your community is safer tomorrow because you guys did this. We'll take a couple more, or we'll call it a night, folks.
Sorry, when you have a conversation with the children, how do you reconcile the confusion between familiar people versus stranger danger?
I'm sorry?
So when you have the conversation with children, obviously when you tell them it could be a stranger, it could be someone familiar,
right?
You're basically giving them the message that who should I be trusting? So I'm asking you, how do you deal with that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. when you tell your children that they should be concerned about strangers and concerned about people they know.
Yeah, so I'm saying to you, is that not very confusing and anxiety-provoking for kids?
Not necessarily. I mean, especially with older children. I mean, the stranger part, you've told them already, right?
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, I imagine every single parent in the audience already covered the stranger danger thing, right? So what you're really coming is you're adding something to this and saying, look, we know we've been talking about this, but you should know sometimes even people that you know and who look like us are chas v'shalom could want to do things that you don't want done to you. Okay? Did I answer your question? Okay.
Because in my mind, if you're basically telling a child, be scared of strangers and be scared of familiar people.
It's not scared. It's not scared. It's not scared. That's the point. It's not scared. You're not teaching them to be scared. You're teaching them to be aware. It's not about fear. You don't want them to be scared. If they're scared, they're going to go crazy. It's not helpful. You don't want them to be scared. You want them to be aware. You know, a lot of people tell me, I get this all the time. Rabbi Horowitz, such a terrible, it's so nice that you're doing this, but, it's, this this generation, the internet, whatever, look what we have to do these days. I said, yeah, let's go back to the good old days when people abused children and nobody did anything about it. It's not that we're saying all of a sudden that we're a bunch of monsters. Chas v'shalom, people are good people. There are some people who want to do things that, here's a way to think about it. So when people tell me, I don't want, my son's Baruch Hashem, my daughter's naive, Baruch Hashem, I don't want to give them any ideas. So I ask them, okay, if your son got an expensive watch for his bar mitzvah, or your daughter got expensive watch or jewelry, whatever, for her bas mitzvah, would you tell your children that somebody might steal it? Or would you say, I don't want to give them any ideas. I don't want them stealing from other people. So we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to use the gimel word, geneva, right? You tell your children there are people who might want to take it from you. Do kids go crazy about that? Are they going to worry day and night and not let the watch out of their hands? You just say, keep it on your wrist. If you put it away in a safe place. That's how they should be. This is how you should be conveying this information to them. Not in a way where they should be terrified. Like I said at the beginning, the research shows it's not even going to work. They're just going to be nervous and that it's going to be a mishmash in their heads. You want to get them comfortable with the notion that they're able to keep themselves safe. Folks, I want to thank you all. I hope you found this a good start and helpful. I commend you all, starting with the Rav Shlita and Lifshitzes and all of you for coming out, for doing this. I can give you a bracha from the bottom of my heart that Hashem should give you nachas from your children, and you should keep them safe and secure. It's very, very doable. You don't need to be frightened. You don't need to frighten your children. Just educate them. Think of a watch. What would you tell your kid? Would you terrify your child that they're having an expensive watch? You might say, this isn't a good place to take your watch, just like you would tell your child, this isn't a safe place for you to be in, because there are some adults, who aren't behaving, whatever it is. It's not a safe place. But try to think of it that the same tension, stress level that you would come for something like this. Thank you so much, everyone. Hatzlacha Rabbah.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz. Thank you
My
so
greatest
much.
pleasure. Be well.